I'm going to see if I can try to say something to clarify Borges' bewildering short story, The Garden of Forking Paths. I want to step back from the bewildering kind of metaphysics of, multiverse, and, questions of alternate paths of time. Step back from that for a second and notice the understated but very familiar themes of ethnic rivalry, male rivalry, civilization versus barbarism, especially in the name Pen. I think that's very helpful. The name Pen, it's a Chinese name, but this story is in a way all about translation. And in English, of course, pen can represent a tool either of communication or incarceration. I think that's really helpful for getting a handle on what this labyrinth. The novel is labyrinth. It communicates, but it also entraps you. And I think that's a helpful way of thinking about history, right? I mean, what is history? It's a construct, like any novel, like any story of time. It's a way of communicating, of noticing, illuminating details of experience by putting it into a temporal continuum. But it's also equally entrapping, and it encloses you and makes you not notice other things. It makes me think of Wallace Stevens' The Snowman, trying to think depopulated experience of a snowman in nature, to notice nothing that is not there and the nothing that is. Can try to imagine history. We tell stories of history, the experience beyond us of a bigger world. But this always means a kind of configuration. Eliminating nothing that is not there means establishing the nothing, a particular conception of nothing, normalizes it in a particular way that's entrapping, that's limiting, that's, what is the? It is a definite article. So you're defining sort of category of what's beyond. You're delimiting it in a certain way. And again, that's the condition. That's a pen in incarceration. That's the condition of the possibility of communication, of the pen that's writing, that's illuminating. So the point of a poem like The Snowman, of taking you through this exercise of reading convoluted sentence and reasoning, is to make you experience that ambivalence, that complexity. What I want to suggest, is that poetry is like a dance. It's like music. But it's about, in the case of someone like Stevens, it's about testing your capacity for dance, your capacity to recognize music. That's what I was suggesting about that owl. To see nothing that is not there and the nothing that is, that's wrong. There is no the nothing, and yet you read it nonetheless. He's mirroring to you, the limits of your own mind. But again, he's communicating. He's making you aware of a kind of complexity you otherwise don't notice in the world by taking your mind to that breaking limit. That's what I want to say about the owl too, as silly as that example may be. It's not dancing, and yet we see it as dancing, right? And you can't unsee it. That's what it means to be trapped. But that's also a wisdom. You're learning about what it means to recognize life, living form. That's intelligence. Even though it's wrong in an objective sense to call it dancing, it would be more wrong to see it as just arbitrary movement, as kind of mechanical in the sense of Descartes. It's, what Descartes thought about bodies in general, is that they were just mechanized, soulless processes. So that would be more wrong, to see the owl that way. So seeing it as dancing, it's a misplaced anthropomorphism. It's not correct, strictly speaking, but it's wiser. It's more perceptive. It's you're learning about what living form is by perceiving it that way, by getting trapped in that illusion of a story. There, I think we're starting to get an idea of what these labyrinths are like. It's like all history is wrong. Any history is wrong. But you're upgrading your intelligence, your perception, your historical awareness, by beginning to recognize these alternate possibilities. So I think Robert Frost's The Road Not Taken is a really helpful companion piece to The Garden of Forking Paths. I mean, it's about the same thing, forking paths, right? Alternate realities, being one traveler and taking both paths. Now, I think there's a blatant contradiction, incongruity or paradox in this poem. He insists throughout the poem that the two paths are the same, and yet the poem concludes by saying it made all the difference. I've accomplished difference. So it's very clearly they're equally traveled by. They're worn really the same. So he's talking about an illusion of difference. He even says here, I took the other. So he did take the other. And then he says he didn't take it. And then he says that made all the difference. So he's talking about how our memory, how our history creates a difference that actually isn't there. So in a way, it's like the real difference has to do with the sameness. This disguised or forgotten, suppressed alternative that wasn't different at first. It only became this idea of difference. It made all the difference in our memory, the narratives we weave about the past. We tell ourselves stories about our self-creation or self-differentiation. But at first, it's like just two options. Like I can go either way. But then I blow that up into some kind of narrative of self-realization. So recognizing these alternate history possibilities of alternate strands of time, it's not about alternate full-blown narratives. That's the mistake, is thinking of these narratives of self-realization. This is what Frost here is mocking, and it's amazing how pervasively this poem is misread, because that's how everybody reads it. It's like I choose to take the path less taken, and that's this heroic choice of self-discovery. But he's mocking that delusion of self-discovery, and I think that brings us back to the question of the role of ethnic rivalry, and civilization versus barbarism in Borges' story, because all these are analogous, right? False narratives of identity, us versus them. These are traps without dance, right? The writer Zadie Smith has a beautiful essay where she talks about the music of history, the kind of drumbeat of war and ethnic identity and rivalry as sort of the lowest common denominator, the crudest music, this sort of just drumbeat of violence. The point about the pen is its subtlety. It's a ironic, ambiguous, labyrinthine structure. This recognition, again, like the owl's dance, it's maybe wrong, maybe an entrapment, but that maybe, that uncertainty, that ambiguity, that introduces a kind of complexity, artistic complexity and wonder that is at least partially liberating dance, and at least partial possibility of communication and community, as opposed to the thoroughly dictated certainty of these rivalries. C.D. Smith wrote, "If novelists know anything, it's that individual citizens are internally plural. They have within them the full range of behavioral possibilities. They are like complex musical scores from which certain melodies can be teased out and others ignored or suppressed, depending, at least in part, on who's doing the conducting. At this moment, all over the world, and most recently in America, the conductors standing in front of this human orchestra have only the meanest and most banal melodies in mind. Here in Germany, you'll remember these martial songs. They're not a very distant memory. But there's no place on earth where they have not been played at one time or another. Those of us who remember, too, a finer music must now try to play it and encourage others, if we can, to sing along."